Hello, I'm the Resolute Cartographer, and this is the story of what happened to Monongah. We'll start this with an examination of the sites surrounding both Monongah in the real world and in the Fallout universe. We'll then cover the layout of Monongah in the Fallout universe, comparing it to the layout of the real world Monongah. We'll then examine the history of Monongah in the Fallout universe, and close with the history of Monongah in the real world. In the Fallout universe, west-northwest of Monongah off Highway 95, one can find the Mothman cultist base known as Ingram Mansion. North-northwest of town, also on Highway 95, Monongah Overlook provides panoramic views of the area that come with a slight possibility of a Yagwai mauling. Monongah Mine, a former Hornwright industrial operation that's now controlled by mole miners, lies north of town on Highway 95. The Brotherhood of Steel's Fort Atlas, formerly the Atlas Observatory, lies up the mountainside to the east-southeast. Southeast of town, one can find the Seneca Rocks with attached giant bird corpse. This is based on the real-world Seneca Rocks, which was found approximately 64 miles away southeast of Monongah, although sadly the real-world version does not have the giant bird corpse. Back to the Fallout universe though. South of Monongah on Highway 95 lies the Seneca Rocks Visitor Center, built at the foot of the rocks for which it's named. Just to the southwest of town lies Monongah Power Plant. This plant, when fully functional, supplies power to 3 power substations: MZ-01, which can be found to the north-northeast near Sunnytop Ski Lanes, MZ-02, which can be found to the south-southwest near White Spring Resort, and MZ-03, which lies south-southwest of the area in the ash heap near Lewisburg. Let's take a moment to consider where Monongah lies in the real world, relative to other sites that we can find in-game. While in-game Clarksburg lies to the northwest of Monongah, in the real world Clarksburg lies approximately 14 miles south-southwest, lying on the West Fork River that also flows through Monongah. While in-game Grafton lies west-northwest of Monongah, real-world Grafton lies approximately 13 miles southeast of Monongah. While in-game Morgantown lies west of Monongah, real-world Morgantown lies approximately 18 miles northeast of Monongah. Along with these cities, Prickett's Fort is also near the real-world Monongah. While in-game it lies north of Monongah, real-world Prickett's Fort lies approximately 8 miles east-northeast of town. This miner's monument, lying south-southwest of in-game Monongah, is very similar to one that can be found 2 miles east of the real-world Monongah in Fairmont's Mary Lou Retton Park. Alright, let's get into Monongah itself. In the Fallout universe, Monongah lies in the foothills of the Savage Divide, at the base of what practically speaking is a cliff face that forms the western edge of the main plateau that lies in the center of the Savage Divide. The town is laid out primarily on a northwest to southeast axis on Highway 95, known locally as Camden Avenue. The town is enclosed in a nearly circular loop, with Old Monongah Road composing the part of the loop south of Camden Avenue, and Pike Street, the part north of Camden Avenue. The last road in town is Church Street, running perpendicular to Camden Avenue, and cutting the southern half of town in two, teeing into Old Monongah Road at the southwest end. In the real world, Monongah lies in the West Fork River Valley, just west of Fairmont, West Virginia, where the West Fork River meets the Tigert Valley River to form the Monongahela River. The Monongahela River flows northeast into Morgantown and onward to eventually meet the Allegheny River to form the Ohio River in Pittsburgh to the north. Monongah lies on the southwest to northeast oriented US 19, also known locally as Camden Avenue. If you watched my video on Flatwoods, you know that Flatwoods also lies on US 19, and in fact, so do Morgantown, Clarksburg, Sutton, Somersville, Beckley, and almost Bromwell. It lies a few miles off the highway to the west. If you were looking to do a tour of several real-world inspirations for the in-game towns, traveling down US 19 would set you up pretty well. Back to Monongah though. Old Monongah Road is also found in the real world, running east from Monongah to neighboring Fairmont. Pike Street is found in the real world too, as a residential street that runs along Camden Avenue to its north. This road seems to be the last explicitly found in the real world, unless you consider South Church Street to be the analog for the in-game Church Street. With all comparisons accounted for, let's get into the composition of the in-game town. Monongah is composed of 14 houses, 2 trailer homes, apartments, a general store, a corner store, with attached fill-up station, a basketball court, a water tower, a police station, and a church. There are an additional 4 houses near the Monongah mine that could be counted as part of the overall total in the Monongah area, and there are a number of sealed mine shafts that line the hills to the east of Monongah. Let's get into the story of Monongah in the Fallout universe. Before the bombs, Monongah was a mining town and had been since the early 20th century at least. By 2075, many of the town's workers still worked in mining jobs, but these jobs were rapidly disappearing across Appalachia, and the town was suffering financially. Monongah was relatively quiet in those days. According to police reports, the crimes dealt with included petty theft by small children, livestock blocking the roads, and in the most dangerous case, an old woman who had barricaded herself in her home after seeing a large animal outside. The town's budget was tight enough that it seems the police were potentially buying their own ammo from a lobby vending machine. The town council was considering hosting a bake sale to raise funds when, on April 2, 2075, they were approached by Hornwright Industrial CEO Daniel Hornwright. Mr. Hornwright offered the council a deal that he called, quote, so beneficial and so incredibly lucrative that simply calling it an offer doesn't begin to do it justice, end quote. He wanted their mineral rights, and to get them, he offered them a large lump sum payment up front and royalties for every ton of coal extracted in perpetuity. Along with this, the miners would no longer have to enter the mine. The council approved the deal 5-0 that night. 12 days later, on April 14, 2075, Hornwright's new mine supervisor, Deke Sykes, arrived at the Monongah mine and began to set up the site for auto miners. This appears to have been one of the earliest uses of auto miners. 4 days later, the auto miners arrived, were uncrated, and began to dig out the old mine collapse from 1907. We'll discuss this collapse later in the real-world history section. After about a month, the mine was fully operational, and the auto miners were making quick work of the coal deposits. With the royalties flowing in, by December 28, 2075, the town council began to approve new projects and programs. What they didn't know was that the high times would soon come to an end. 4 days prior to that council meeting, on Christmas Eve 2075, mine supervisor Deke Sykes received a geological report detailing that the coal was only a month from running out. He was shocked by this, as he had assumed that they would be mining the site long term, but a request for the original estimated coal deposits showed him that this was not the case. Daniel Hornwright had known how little coal there was on the site. He wanted to test his auto miners on a new project, and Monongah was their testing ground. Shockingly, it turns out that Mr. Hornwright was not being as altruistic as he claimed. By January 2076, the coal was gone, and Deke Sykes was packing up the auto miners to leave. Locals watching the site made the decision to steal some of the equipment before Hornwright left completely. Not knowing that Hornwright already had everything they needed, the locals went deep into the mine, where they were trapped when Deke Sykes blasted the entrance of the mine, stealing them in. One of these locals was Earl Williams. His daughter Maggie attempted in vain to dig her father out, but failed. It appears that what took place in the aftermath of this was a cover-up by Hornwright and a complicit local government. Though the coal was gone by January, and no royalty payments should have been forthcoming, Hornwright continued to pay Monongah. In April of 2076, the town council sent a fruit basket to Daniel Hornwright in thanks for his assistance. These high times finally came to a crushing end on August 23, 2077, when they learned that no more royalties would be coming. The town council, having spent their surplus on new projects and programs, had nothing saved. By September 30th, 2077, the town was out of money. The only ideas for recovery forthcoming being a pair of letters, one to Daniel Hornwright and one to the state government asking for assistance. People began to abandon town and crime rose. The local corner store and some of the homes put bars up on their windows or boarded them up altogether. On October 23, 2077, the end of the old world came with thousands of nuclear detonations. Monongah was not hit directly, but the violent end of civilization brought with it the shifting of the tectonic plates, shaking the earth and causing 3 massive boulders to roll into town. 2 of these boulders slammed into the first house they came in contact with and stopped. But the third passed straight through a house before slamming into a bus, pushing it out of the street, crushing a car, and coming to rest in the house across the street. A flatbed traveling south on Camden Avenue jackknifed as it attempted to stop before entering the crevice left behind by the boulder, pulling a delivery van along with it. Drivers tried to fill up at the local station, but found their cars inoperable soon after. A week later at the neighboring nuclear plant, the 121st Infantry Platoon under Captain Elliott arrived to secure the site, as it was considered strategically important. On the 22nd of December, half of Captain Elliott's men were diverted away by command, leaving him with only 2 squads to hold the plant. The captain was worried that he would no longer be capable of holding off a larger threat. These fears were realized the following January when one of his patrols went missing. They were later found hanging from a tree, and his men investigating the missing patrol were fired upon. It was around this time that he noted a loss of contact with the military chain of command. On February 2, 2078, the plant was hit, and the captain got his first look at the enemy. Raiders. The soldiers continued to hold the plant until May 25, 2078, when they abandoned the site after Captain Elliott was killed. The raiders moved in and painted their sigils on the newly won territory, but it appears that they moved on after their victory. It may have been that these raiders were the same ones that were picking over the ruins of Monongah, missing Dr. Eddie Harrison in his basement to the south end of town. Dr. Harrison was something of an eccentric scientist and not generally well liked by his fellow Monongans. His experiments had aroused enough ire to warrant a request for him to appear before the town council to explain himself. Maybe their disdain for Dr. Harrison led his neighbors to put the name Victor on his mailbox, in homage to Dr. Frankenstein. In the time after the bombs, though he celebrated outliving his former adversaries in town, he lamented his loneliness. In his desperation to find companionship, he started work on a new invention. He'd been attempting to create a baby translator in the years before the war, but he failed to get any testers for his device. In 2080, he repurposed that device to translate animals instead. The Vox interpreter worked, but it came at the cost of his own life, having been gifted an infected bite by a squirrel in November of 2080. Aside from Dr. Harrison, there are 3 other Monongahs to discuss. Before the bombs, the police station had also been the office for the Marion County Sheriff, Sheriff Darcy. Sheriff Darcy appears to have been working with former BAD TFL agent Curtis Wilson to unearth corruption in the United States government. After the bombs, the two of them found the truth much easier to obtain, as they were able to enter defunct government sites with far less resistance. Unfortunately, Sheriff Darcy was killed sometime after the bombs, likely by the source of the corruption in the government that he was investigating. In the aftermath of this killing, Curtis Wilson fled the territory, hoping to avoid the same fate and waiting for the right time to return. Sheriff Darcy was not the last living Monongah, though. We also have to consider Maggie Williams, daughter of the out-of-work Monongah miner Earl Williams, who was trapped in the Monongah mine. Maggie survived the bombs and eventually returned to Appalachia with the settlers of Foundation. From Foundation, she requests assistance in tracking down mementos of her father within the sealed depths of the Monongah mine. When blasted open with a nuclear warhead, the mine can be entered again, where not only mementos of Earl Williams can be found, but Earl Williams himself. When Hornwright mine supervisor Deke Sykes blasted the entrance of the mine closed on January 7, 2076, sealing those townspeople inside, he managed to kill one of them. With no other sources of food, they ate the remains of that person. This process was repeated with all the other survivors until all that was left was Earl Williams, Wendigo Colossus. His death leaves Maggie Williams as the only known surviving resident of Monongah. Today, Monongah is home to mole miners and their mole rat pets. That should do it for the history of Monongah in the Fallout universe. Let's take a look at the history of Monongah in the real world. For the prehistory of the site, I feel that I've covered the peoples of the Adena and Hopewell cultures extensively enough in other videos to simply say they were the first residents of the area. For a big chunk of the history in this section, I found the book The History in Progress of the County of Marion, West Virginia, written by Geo.A. Dunnington and published in 1880. According to what I found here, it appears that the original land claiming process for the area was as follows. Build a cabin, raise a crop of grain. These 2 acts entitled the farmer to 400 acres of land with an option for 1,000 more acres. Now, that might seem pretty amazing, but you do have to consider that this was land on the frontier of the empire, not terribly well protected from native raids, and was far from the markets for that grain. The first colonists attempting to settle the region were the Tigerts and the Files in 1754. The Files family settled near where Beverly, West Virginia now lies, and the Tigerts settled a few miles upstream. These early settlements came to an end when the Files were massacred apart from one son, who fled to the Tigerts, who in turn fled the region. Though they left, the valley still bears the Tigert name. The same year, 1754, marked the start of the French and Indian War in North America, which carried on until 1763. From the end of that war until 1774, the region was fairly peaceful, a condition that was ended by the unprovoked murder of 3 natives by colonist John Ryan over the course of a year. These murders of natives friendly with the colonists led to retaliation on guiltless colonists, which led to retaliation by the colonists on the natives. This resulted in large-scale raids by the natives, which then resulted in Lord Dunmore's War of 1774, which I've talked about in the videos on Point Pleasant and to a greater extent Louisburg. The first permanent settlements in Marion County date to the 1770s. The original Prickett's Fort was built around this time as a refuge for settlers to go to in the case of attack. The fort eventually fell into disuse as the frontier moved west, but the Prickett family continued to live on the land up until the 1960s, and the fort was reconstructed nearby in the 1970s. According to Dunnington, Marion County did not contribute many men to the Revolutionary War effort, as the men were needed at home to protect their families from native raids. And while the frontier had moved west by the War of 1812, the fighting was far off from the county and the call for volunteers wasn't as great. Of course, Marion County didn't even exist in those days, as it wasn't created until January 14, 1842, from parts of Monongah and Harrison counties. The county was named for Revolutionary War General Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. 1849 brought the survey by the B&O Railroad, and with it, a wave of immigration to build the railroad. According to Dunnington, this led to the, quote, Irish Riot, end quote, of 1849. Members of Irish clans from 2 different locations are said to have gotten into a fight that spread to other members of their clans until they eventually met in Fairmont, where they were all subsequently arrested by the townspeople. It's a strange story to be sure. That same year, 3 turnpikes were under construction in the county. It was a time of enterprise and industry. 1850 was the year the first steamboat reached the head of the Monongahela at Fairmont. 1852 brought a great flood in the region, starting with heavy rain on Monday, April 5th, that by Tuesday afternoon was causing the waters of the West Fork River and Monongahela River to rise at a rate of 5 feet per hour. Many houses floated past Fairmont, and many mills along both rivers were destroyed. But 1852 also brought with it the completion of the section of the B&O Railroad that ran to Fairmont, and the construction of a suspension bridge over the Monongah at Fairmont. When the Virginia Secession Convention met in April and May of 1861, Marion County's delegates voted against secession, though it should be noted that one of these delegates, Alpheus F. Haymond, subsequently joined the Confederate Army following his father into service. After the war, he went on to become a justice of West Virginia's Supreme Court of Appeals. The other delegate, Ephraim B. Hall, returned home after the convention and became one of the delegates to the Wheeling Convention that solidified West Virginia's separation from Virginia. After the war, he would go on to become West Virginia's second Attorney General. Many men from Marion County served in both sides of the Civil War, or the War of Rebellion as Dunnington calls it. The only major event that took place in Marion County, though, was a Confederate raid that destroyed the B&O Rail Bridge over the Monongah on April 29, 1863. The home of West Virginia's Provisional Governor Pierpont was in Fairmont as well, and it became a target for the Confederate raiders, who burnt the books of his personal library in the street. After the war, the soldiers returned home and set about restoring their homesteads. Around 1870, interest began to grow in the natural resources of West Virginia. Marion County turned to mining as coal mines were excavated across the region. Fairmont suffered a fire in April 1876 that destroyed much of the business district. The fire, fueled by high winds that threw burning shingles across the Monongah, was nearly futile to fight with the existing technology of the day. Bucket chains only managed to extinguish the fire after the wind shifted. In 1891, Monongah was chartered to the west of Fairmont, named as an abbreviated form of Monongahela from the nearby river. Monongah seems to have been a coal mining town from the start, and these miners suffered the worst mining disaster in the history of the United States. At about 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday, December 6, 1907, two blasts ripped through the mine, causing collapses, breaking the ventilation system, and killing many miners instantly. Rescuers arrived quickly, but were severely limited by the technology of their day. The mines were filled with carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen, and very little oxygen. The rescuers didn't have breathing apparatus. The miners were known to take their children and other relatives into the mine to help them work. This means that though there were 367 miners that were registered as being in the mine that morning, we don't really know the true count. A few miners were rescued, leaving the official death toll at 361, almost half of whom were Italian immigrants. The cause of these blasts is unknown, but suspected to have been sparked by a miner's lamp igniting methane, which subsequently ignited coal dust. The disaster led to the creation of the United States Bureau of Mines in 1910. The Bureau of Mines was chartered as a federal body responsible for inspecting mines, ensuring proper ventilation to prevent buildup of flammable gases, train mine crews, respond to disasters, and then investigate those disasters to prevent future disasters. Better technology and increased inspection brought the annual death toll in mines down from 1,000 per year before 1910 to 500 per year by the 1950s. This disaster evidently took place in the Fallout universe as well, as part of the initial setup time for Hornwright Industrial was clearing the debris left over from the disaster. Despite this tragedy, Monongah grew 16.7% in population between 1900 and the 1910 census, reaching its highest point at 2,084. Every census until 2010 showed a declining population, bottoming out at 939 in 2000 before rising for the last census. The town had an estimated population of 1,149 in 2019. There was a rail line through Monongah at some point in the past. This rail line has become the West Fork River Rail Trail. Rail trails follow the path of defunct rail lines, where the rails and ties have been pulled up, leaving a hiking, biking, horseback riding trail in its path. Unfortunately, I was not able to find information on what this old line was, like I did for the Sutton and Flatwoods lore videos. Monongah is in a beautiful area, and I see it growing as more widely available high-speed internet disperses our population across the United States. Alright, I think that'll do it for Monongah. If you want notifications when I launch these lore videos, you can follow me at Gaming with Maps on Twitter. If you appreciate what I do here and desire to assist me financially, you can sign up to be a patron on Patreon. There are links to both my Twitter and Patreon on the About page for this channel, and in the description. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.